Hello, friends. I am so delighted today to be joined by my friend Anna Knaub. She is a wife, a mother, and a teacher. Anna has her degree in secondary English education from the University of Valley Forge and has been working with kids for over 20 years. She's your average mom living in overalls with a cold cup of coffee, trying to figure out this crazy life of motherhood and wifehood. And Anna and I spend a lot of time chatting with each other on Instagram about everything ranging from Shakespeare to Hurricanes hockey and
Yes.
rom-com tropes. So she's really fun. And I'm just really glad to have this opportunity to chat with you here. So, Anna, that was like an official
Yeah.
introduction, but can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, how you became interested in homeschooling, and what
Yeah.
homeschooling looks like right now in your family
Yeah.
life?
Absolutely. So I have spent most of my life in Pennsylvania. I'm a military brat. So I was born in Germany. We spent some time in Washington State. I actually grew up outside of Philly in the Valley Forge, Phoenixville area. So I have a deep love of history. Thankfully, it's one of my favorite places. And then I met my husband, Ethan, when we were in college. It was Valley Forge Christian College, now the University of Valley Forge. And I transplanted out to Lancaster, which is mostly known for its like Amish population. But I always joke that I live in the land of cows and chocolate because my literal neighbors are cows. I'm about 15 minutes away from Hershey. We have a Dove factory in town, a Wilbur factory, and like I'm genuinely surrounded by cows and chocolate. Um, it's great. We have two daughters. Athena is 6, and Eleanor is about to turn 4 at the end of the month here. And we have two cats, and I know that you'll appreciate this. The first one is Missy, the second one is Gimli. And we have two dogs, Samwise and Strider. And so there's obviously a theme there with that one. And we always know the real Lord of the Rings fans when we tell people that our second dog's name is Strider. They're like, oh, that's good.
I love
Um,
it.
so yeah, life is a little bit of chaos all the time around here with a full house. But as far as getting into homeschooling, when I was 18 and in college, I worked at Vera Bradley at the Philadelphia outlets. And I met this crazy lady there, and her name is Melissa Grande, and she is still one of my best friends to this day. And she was like the first real crunchy homeschool mom that I'd ever met. She was sourdoughing and she had chickens and was homeschooling. And I thought this lady was crazy, but we were best friends anyway. And then as I got a little older and started having children, I realized that she was not as crazy as I thought she was. And so once we had Athena, and I just was like, I can't send my kid to school. I'm like, I don't want to leave my kid. And so I jumped into it. And Athena is twice exceptional. She has sensory processing disorder and she is gifted. She is tested legitimately. I'm not just a mom that thinks my kid is awesome, even though she is. She is very, very smart. And I did not feel that the school system would be able to serve her as well as I could, even though I felt like I had no idea what I was doing too. Um, and so, yeah, we have been homeschooling and doing things for a good 3 years now with her. This is her first official year with our state. And that's kind of how I got into homeschooling. I met a crazy friend and now here I am. It just kind of sucked me in.
I love it. I hope we can all be that crazy friend that convinces some
Yes,
unsuspecting young mom
yes.
to embark on this adventure. Well, so you have been a mom now for 6 years, a little more
Mhm.
than 6 years. What are some of the things that being a mom has taught you? Are there things that you know about yourself now that maybe you didn't know before you became a mom?
Yeah. I think for me, I don't have to do it all is the big thing. I come from a family with like really strong work ethic, which is great. And I am so appreciative of that. But I also had to learn, having a child with extra needs and everything, that it's okay if the dishes don't get done. they will be there at the end of the day, always looking at you, right? And it's okay if you have piles of laundry, which I know we've joked about on Instagram too. And just being okay with that and giving yourself grace in the season. Something that I've really leaned into and learned in the last few years is life is so seasonal, right? And even the Bible is so seasonal. And the Proverbs 31 woman is very seasonal too. It talks about how she plants her vineyard, but then she's like prepared for snow, right? Obviously, both of those things aren't happening at the same time. And so just relinquishing that, especially in the seasons that I know that we're both in right now in a lot of ways, that it's okay that I'm not making clothes, I'm not feeding my family like 4 beautiful meals a day, I'm not having lavish gardens. Like, I'm not all things to all people at all times, all day, every day, 365 days a year. And that's something I think it's easy early in motherhood to feel like you have to do those things, or to feel like you are not doing enough, especially like, and I know that you're like this too, like I'm a full-time stay-at-home mom and I do other things, but you feel like as a full-time stay-at-home mom, like I have to do this thing, my house should look like this, like all of this stuff. And the reality is that that's not reality. And that is okay. Tiny humans, can you tell? And so just really kind of leaning into that understanding. And like I said, just giving myself that grace for the different seasons and the ebbs and flows of life.
Yeah, my friend Dawn Garrett talks about like the myth of the composite homeschool mom, and she has this great image that she created where she basically made like a Frankenstein monster kind of thing with bits and pieces of eyes and chins and nose from all these different women. And it's so easy as moms for us to look and see this mom making bread and this mom, reading Shakespeare with her kids, which, is great. But we can look at all these different things and we think, okay, so I have to do all of them all at once. And we take the strengths from every mom that we see and we try to put them into one superwoman. And that's not realistic. No one mom is doing all of those things all at the same time. And when we set that up as our expectation for ourselves or for others, it just leads to disappointment and stress and anxiety. And so I love your reminder to just be seasonal, to not try to do all the things all at once, and to realize that we are finite. Like, we're actually happier when
Yeah.
we accept our finiteness rather than trying to
Yes.
do it all.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
Well, Anna, even before you were a homeschool mom, you were already a teacher. You've been in the teaching world, the education world for a while. You were a high school
Yeah.
English teacher.
Yes.
And you still are a high school English teacher. So how did you decide to teach high school English?
Yeah. When I was in high school, I was actually between going to school for broadcast journalism and meteorology. I wanted to be a weather bunny, and teaching. And so I explored both of those options a bit. And by my senior year, I was pretty settled on going to be a teacher, but I didn't know what I wanted to teach. I had taken a music theory elective when I was in high school. I'm very musical. I've sung my whole life. And I very quickly realized that music theory was not my jam. And maybe I should not teach this. I'm pretty sure I passed because the band director so graciously gave me like, you tried really hard points. But like triads and all that other not.
Mhm.
And so I went to public school, and my senior year, the curriculum, we had a Shakespeare elective class. And I decided to take both of those because I had enjoyed Shakespeare the few times that I had read it. In my school, you did a Shakespeare every year, whether it fit with like the theme of the year or not, which is a conversation we'll have in a bit, I know. And so I took this full year of Shakespeare, and I just had the best English teacher my senior year. Mr. Hausman loved what he was teaching and was very knowledgeable in it. And when you have a teacher that likes what they're teaching, it makes a difference, you know. And Mr. Palmer, who was my Shakespeare teacher for that elective, he also loved Shakespeare and loved what he was doing and teaching it. And so that's kind of the point of teaching too, to a degree, is like you want to inspire students. So I took Brit and Shakespeare, and I had an incredible time. And I already loved history and I loved English. I also really like computers, which probably surprises some people. My grandfather worked for IBM for 30 years. My younger brother is actually in IT. And so I always say, like, my brother can take apart a computer and put it back together, and all kinds of cool, like, gaming computers and stuff. But like, I was Microsoft certified in high school. And so I felt that English was the thing that would get me to do all of those things. I get to teach kids how to do presentations and use cool programs like Prezi and Padlet and Canva. But I am a huge believer and proponent for the fact that you cannot have history without literature, and you cannot have literature without history. And so, like, you can't teach Beowulf without talking about the Anglo-Saxons and Sutton Hoo and Vikings and all of that fun stuff. You can't teach Canterbury Tales without learning about Thomas Becket and Henry II and, you know, everything that happened there to make Canterbury, you know, a pilgrimage site. You obviously cannot teach Shakespeare without also talking about historical context. And so English really allows me to teach computer things. It allows me to teach history, which makes me just nerd out so hard. And it allows me to teach the literature and have the conversations. And, you know, I love teaching kids to write, which is funny because I hated writing when I was in high school. I also wasn't really great at it until like senior year, the light bulb went on. And so I think because I did kind of struggle as a writer through high school, it's made me a better teacher at teaching writing, because I'm like, listen, I get it. You think the writing process is dumb. I too thought the writing process was dumb. And then I begrudgingly did the writing process and realized that it worked.
Yes.
So that is kind of, that's the long way around how I became an English teacher. And yeah, I love it. It's my favorite for sure.
I can just hear your passion and excitement and enthusiasm coming across. And I'm just thinking there's maybe a mom listening who's like, I want to provide this rich literary education. I want to inspire my children in this way, you know, especially their teens. But maybe they feel ill-equipped. Maybe they didn't have that high school English teacher that inspired them like you did. Or maybe they feel like they don't know all of this background of the history and the writing process and things like that. So do you have any advice or tips or encouragement for a
Yeah.
homeschool, just an ordinary homeschool mom who's trying to do
Yeah.
this thing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see a lot in like the Facebook groups and stuff and everything, that a lot of parents miss if they're teaching the English themselves, right? I think a lot of parents think if my kid is reading, then that's enough. And listen, I'm almost 300 books into the year here, okay? I am not doing literary analysis on every book that I read, okay? It's just not happening. But there's a difference between reading a book to read a book and reading it for understanding and analysis and going deeper in it. And so one of the easiest things that you as a parent can do if you have your kid reading something like The Great Gatsby is literally just asking the question, why? One of the biggest components to literary analysis is, you know, why did the author give Gatsby blue curtains? Right? That's always the argument. Does it represent his depression, or did Gatsby just like blue? Because let's be honest, Gatsby was like on a beach. Blue is a typical kind of color for a beach, right? You know, why did Gatsby make the decisions that he did? What was his motivations behind his actions? You can so easily take a book from reading it to read it to literary analysis, and encouraging your kids to think deeper by just having them ask why about things. There are so many resources. Honestly, Pinterest is great. It still is. Like, I'm on Pinterest all the time trying to find stuff. I have resources. There's just so many resources out there. Don't be afraid to try and find a unit plan for a book. You know, if you're not somebody who's, signing your kid up for one of my classes, or, buying a whole year open and go kind of curriculum, there are options and opportunities out there for individual book units. You just kind of have to sift through it. I would say don't be afraid to change your book either. I was working with a mom here in Pennsylvania. I do homeschool consultations and evaluations in Pennsylvania. It's a whole thing. And she was going to have her 10th grade son read the Scarlet Letter, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with the Scarlet Letter, but he was ready to stab his eyeballs out with a pitchfork. He was like, Mom, this is awful. And she messaged me and goes, he hates this. What can I do? And I said, well, just read The Crucible. Like, you're still in the same time period there. Like, it's just read The Crucible. And she was like, oh, I can do that. I'm like, yeah, nobody's telling you have to read the Scarlet Letter, So I would also say, like, find stuff that you all kind of enjoy. And make sure, I mean, listen, your kid's not going to like every single book. It's not going to happen. You and I don't like every single book. I don't love all of the classics. I love Of Mice and Men. Grapes of Wrath makes me want to hide in a hole, So I choose to teach Of Mice and Men because I don't want to touch Grapes of Wrath with a 10-foot pole. And that's okay. Ambleside Online is a really great resource. I love Ambleside. It is so rich. I think it is incredible. But some of the literature on there, as wonderful as it is, it's classic. Again, it's rich and it's deep. But I have parents every year that are like, oh yeah, that was like a nightmare. And I just want to be like, you could skip it. And your kid is still going to have an incredible education, So I would say ask the questions. And encourage them to ask the questions too. Look for that why. Why did the author include this? Why did the character do this? And don't be afraid to change if a book isn't working for you. Find something parallel, a different book from the author, a different book from the same time period. And don't be afraid to ask around, hey, do you have any resources for this? Because there's a really good chance that somebody in your friend group or co-op or Facebook group or something can direct you to a resource for something that you're looking for.
I love that too, because when you're asking questions, you're not having to already be the expert. I think, especially as kids start getting a little older, we're heading into junior high, high school years, moms can feel a lot of pressure. Like, I don't know all this stuff already. How can I homeschool if I don't already know all of these things?
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder, just like when they're little and we talk about the joy of learning alongside your children as you homeschool, the same can still be happening in those teen years. You can just ask questions together and, encourage your kids to ask questions as well, but you don't have to already know the answers. You're modeling that exploration and that humility towards the subject as well. Like, let's come and learn this together. And then I also really liked your reminder that, the curriculum is not the boss of you. You are the boss of the curriculum, right? It's a tool.
That's the perfect way to put that.
Yeah. So you have the power as the homeschool mom to adjust to make the curriculum fit your family and your needs. And it's actually a gift that homeschooling gives us, for sure.
And I love to encourage parents in that too. And as I was saying, in Pennsylvania, we have this evaluation model for families. And so you register with your school district every year that you're a homeschooler. And back in the day, parents would have to put a binder portfolio together, like big, 4 or 5 inch binders. And you turned that into the school district, and the school district evaluated you and let you know that you could continue homeschooling, basically. And they changed that model a number of years ago so that you get to pick a person to evaluate you which I just think is awesome because parents get to pick a person that they like, that works for their family. You can stay with somebody for multiple years so they see the growth of your child. And so that's something that I always encourage families, like even when looking for an evaluator, like it's okay if it's not me. If you don't think that I'm going to work for your family, I want you to have a positive homeschool experience. And if I'm not the fit for you, that's okay. It's more important for me that you are having a good homeschool experience. And that goes for curriculum too. I could recommend The Good and the Beautiful to you. It may not work for your family. And that's okay. There are some people that like curriculum hop hardcore, and that gives me anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
For sure, that like there are people I follow on Instagram, they get through like a quarter of the way through a program and they're like, I don't really like this. I feel like it's not working for us. We're going to change. And by the end of the year, I'm like, like that just kills me. But there are ways to dodge and weave and swerve and manipulate and adjust, that to make things work for your family without, burying yourself 7 curriculums deep too.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm so with you. I think that there's that thought like if I just maybe there's a problem or we don't it's not always fun. It's still hard sometimes. So there must be a better curriculum out there. And if you're
Yeah.
always looking for the perfect curriculum that will keep your children always interested, no one will ever fight. Everything will always be easy and it might just even do your dishes too. Like you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah,
So pick the imperfect curriculum and just do it faithfully a little bit every day.
exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Well, I want to talk to you, of course, about Shakespeare because I have to, because
Yeah.
we share this mutual nerdy love for Shakespeare and it makes me so happy. And
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit about your high school experience. I'm assuming
Mhm.
that's kind of when you first started getting interested in
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Kind of take us through your love journey with, with
Oh my
Shakespeare
goodness. Yes.
and why you think, in all seriousness, why do you think including Shakespeare in a home education is valuable or important?
Yeah. Oh my goodness gracious. This is like the biggest can of worms. So, as I said, in my public school, you read one Shakespeare a year. I was in honors Shakespeare my freshman year. So we actually read Othello and Romeo and Juliet. Sophomore year, we read Julius Caesar. Junior year, we read Hamlet. And senior year, we read Macbeth. And then in my Shakespeare full year class, we read, oh gosh, I was trying to think of them all last night before we did this, and a good chunk more of them, obviously. Um, and I just had, again, so much fun. I feel like my teachers did a really good job of balancing, um, pointing out the humor, giving us that historical context, talking about why Shakespeare is timeless, and just making it palatable for us as high schoolers, honestly. Um, and so then when I was in college, I did like all of my electives on medieval and Renaissance literature. So again, like Beowulf, Chaucer, Shakespeare. I just love the dead dudes. And when I was in high school still, I think I have it here. Do I have my Harold Bloom? I usually do. My Harold Bloom book is in here. Harold Bloom, he was an incredible Shakespeare professor, and I have many of his books. But he wrote a book, the Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, and he breaks down pretty much all of the characters in Shakespeare and how Shakespeare provided characterization. And one of the things that he points out, which is so fascinating, is prior to Shakespeare, we don't ever get really any inner monologue in literature. The closest that we get to it is like King David in the Psalms in the Bible, because that's obviously like basically a teenage boy's diary. Let's be fair. Um, Chaucer almost gets there, but Chaucer is still a narrator. He's telling you about the characters and like their stories from that kind of third party perspective. But Shakespeare was the first person to give you like the soliloquy. Shakespeare was the first person to give us that inner monologue in Hamlet, in Iago, in Much Ado About Nothing. And so he really kind of invented this concept of like character motive and character drive. And again, just the concept of like feeling of a character driving the plot and moving things forward. And I think Hamlet's probably one of the best examples of that, obviously. And obviously him and Chaucer, they both created a few thousand words. So that's pretty cool too. Like Shakespeare was the first guy to use vomit in literature, which I think it always makes me laugh too. Um, and just when you read an analysis like Harold Bloom's Invention of the Human, it adds so much depth to what could just be words on a page. I also really like, and I'm sure you probably own half of these too. I really like the Folger Shakespeare. And for those of you who are watching like on YouTube, you can see it. I really love the Folger Shakespeare copies because on the opposite side of where the play content is, there's notes. And so like if there's specific biblical allegory, if there is like historical context references there, they give you those notes, which again just adds more depth and richness to it because we're 400 years away from Shakespeare. And so some of it does kind of get lost in translation. Not everybody's going to understand like the King Henry VIII and his 6 wives references. Not everybody's going to understand the Edward the Black Prince references and Henry V, unless you're really a historical nerd like me and it's a problem. And Shakespeare does that in a way that I don't know that we've seen again. I'm sure there could be argument for like Tolkien. Obviously, we're Tolkien fans in this house, minus Tom Bombadil. Good Lord, Tom Bombadil. But Shakespeare just creates all of the human emotion. And I don't know if you've ever heard Dame Judi Dench talk about Shakespeare, but she has on like Graham Norton and stuff. And she like makes me cry every time she talks about it. Like that woman can whoop out Shakespeare like nobody's business. And in one of her interviews, she was talking about just the emotion of Shakespeare too, and how he invokes that so eloquently and so precisely, which again, prior to Shakespeare, you didn't see that. You didn't hear that. It just didn't exist in the same way. And so I really love teaching those components to students and like pointing out those tidbits. Shakespeare was meant to be heard, not read, right? Shakespeare is a playwright. These are plays with characters and actors. And so it's very easy for some of that to get lost in translation in a page, which I think it's important to read Shakespeare out loud when you can. There are even, and we've talked about this too, some really awesome movies, especially like Much Ado About Nothing. Denzel Washington has done incredible Shakespeare movies. Keanu Reeves is in one even. And so, you know, I would say also don't be afraid to like read Shakespeare out loud, or I know you can find some of the Folger Shakespeares on Audible even, and they are fully casted and recorded even, which is nice too. And so I think finding resources like Invention of the Human. You can get on YouTube. There are some lectures of Harold Bloom talking about Shakespeare on YouTube. I offer resources too. But Shakespeare, I just love him so much. There's just so much depth to everything. I mean, like when I was teaching Merchant of Venice, we did some pretty decent historical context on like the first Jewish ghetto and what that meant and what some of the laws were. And we talked about, I found some really great podcast episodes about different like lawsuits and charges and inquisition kind of things that were happening. And, you know, they were even concerned about stuff like if a Jewish nursemaid nurses my baby, or if a Christian nursemaid nurses the Jewish baby, has the Jewish baby now like intaken communion through the Christian, like all of these concepts and issues that we tend to lose because we're so far removed from it, but it adds that depth to the play. Like, you understand why Shylock was so devastated when Jessica leaves, or when he's forced to convert, or even the treatment of Shylock with Antonio. Like, all of that stuff, it just feels so much bigger. And it's so much more painful for us as a modern audience to read that when you understand the historical depth that comes with it, which again is why I teach English, because I get to, marry that historical and that English. But I mean, Shakespeare is just a masterclass in all things, and I could just gush forever.
I did not realize, I had not really contemplated as you were saying that Shakespeare was the first one to kind of give us this inner monologue, this motivation of the character driving the plot. I was like sitting here trying to come up with a counterexample, and I was like, oh, she's right.
Yeah,
I've never thought
yeah,
about that. But that's one of the things that makes Shakespeare so timeless and so powerful, is the way he communicates the humanity of his characters in a way
yeah,
that we can recognize ourselves. We can recognize, even aspects of yourself in some of his villains. I think he does
yeah.
such an incredible job making
Mm,
truly human bad guys, right?
yes,
They're not
yeah.
just flat characters, they're complicated. Actually,
Mhm.
Merchant of Venice, I think, is a great example. I love the character of Shylock, and I think that
Yes,
play does such an incredible job of not just riding on stereotypes, and
yeah,
there could have been a cheap play to just sort of get some cheap laughs at the
sure.
expense of cultural stereotypes. And there's some depth there, and there's a compassion that you feel for his villains throughout his plays, I think. Not in a way where it would minimize, the reality of goodness, truth, justice, all those things, but in a
Yeah,
sense of like, that's humanity, right? We are complex. And I love that about Shakespeare. And I think that's why even teens, they can see the angst in a character, and be able to recognize their own life experiences in these Shakespearean stories. And it's not because the plots are relatable, because the plots are like crazy, like whatever. The plots aren't even sometimes the point, but the
right,
characters
right.
are so beautiful.
Yeah, I just think it's so important. One of the things that I love about Shakespeare, and you said it too, is how timeless he is. And we talk about why that is a lot in our classes. And you know, he was doing plays for everybody from Queen Elizabeth I and King James, all the way down to like the poorest present peasant gnawing on a crust of bread. And there are a few components that most plays, pretty much all plays, have that make this so transcendent against time and gender and social class and everything. The first is biblical references. Like, everybody in that time period would have known the biblical references, right? Like, that just would have been a thing. And I'll even throw in the mythology references too. Um, Midsummer Night's Dream is chock full and overflowing with mythology references. So biblical and like mythology references, those are going to transcend time. Everybody's going to know those generally. The second one is, I always say it's really funny, but like the body part jokes. Again, this was like a lot of it was slapstick humor, and some of it maybe not like the most appropriate in the world, right? Like, let's be honest. But I think it's also important to recognize, especially when kids are older, like you're talking about high school kids. It's important that it's in there because that comedic relief is so important in something like Romeo and Juliet, right? Because you don't want somebody so depressed when they leave your play that they don't want to come back and see your next one. So you got to give them some like funny parts so that they're not, totally destroyed. And they're like, oh, but do you remember this joke? So body parts, because let's be honest, the queen has body parts, and so does the peasant in the front row. And
A little
so
bathroom humor is good for everybody.
little potty humor is good for everybody, for sure. And the third one is just, again, his characters. And like you said, just the realness and the relativity of the characters. Everybody understands and will experience jealousy. They'll experience love. They will experience, maybe not a love triangle or square or whatever Midsummer Night's Dream is. And they'll understand things like history, and they'll understand, honor and the need to prove oneself, right? Like Henry V was a hot mess, and Henry IV, like Prince Hal, they had very low expectations of him. And they say in the beginning of Henry V, like, we did not expect much of him coming out of his youth, but here we are getting ready to kick France's butt. And Henry V himself, like, wants to prove himself. And I think because he created such relatable characters, my uncle did not kill my dad, and my mom did not marry my uncle. But I think we can all relate to Hamlet and his drive for justice in some degree, shape, or form, and I think those are the things that really kind of make, like I said, Shakespeare timeless across time periods. We still have body parts, we still understand history. We still understand the biblical references and even the mythological references. And so those are just some things that like keep it relevant, even though it's 400 years old.
Well, you know that last year, my daughter Emma and I did our own little Shakespeare challenge where we read
Yes.
every single one of Shakespeare's plays over the school year. It was a lot of
Which is
Shakespeare. It
incredible.
was
I
so
don't know how
fun.
you did it.
It was a lot. It was a lot, but it was such a fun experience. And it was so fun to do it together, to do it with her.
Yeah.
She actually came on and recorded a video, a podcast episode with me about that as well. But you are doing a Shakespeare challenge this year. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so I am an English teacher at True North Homeschool Academy, where I kind of say like an online homeschool co-op, basically. And you can do like a full course load for kids, or you can do a la carte and just pick like one or two classes. And I taught a full year of Shakespeare last year. We read 6 plays over our 30-week school year. We do Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, Henry V, Macbeth, and The Merchant of Venice. And just over the years, even when I was teaching in public school and stuff, I would talk about what we were doing in class, and people would be, oh, I wish I was in your class. Like, you seem so fun. I wish my teacher had liked Shakespeare as much as you. I had done pre-service work with a teacher that hated teaching Shakespeare and hated teaching Romeo and Juliet because she felt so uncomfortable with it. I'm like, you just have to lean into the ridiculousness, is honestly what it is. Like, they're like 12 and this all happens in 7 days. It's absurdity to the max. And so when you do that, it makes it easier. But this year, I decided to loop people in. And so I have a reading plan for the 30 weeks for the 6 plays that we're doing. On Fridays, after I teach my class, I will be posting like tidbits and historical context and fun facts, and I will share like conversation pieces from my own students. And that's like all in a PDF. I've also provided note pages with how to appropriately reference Shakespeare, because referencing plays is not the same as referencing a book. And then I will also have available for purchase my actual study guides. So following along is completely free. It's a really fun opportunity for parents and students to do something like you and your daughter did. Not quite as extra as all of his plays, obviously, but it gives you a little taste of everything. Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth are tragedies. Henry V is a history. Much Ado and Midsummer Night's Dream are comedies, very different comedies though. Midsummer Night's Dream it's kind of like the cartoon equivalent of a Shakespeare. And Puck even says like, this is all a dream. And it totally feels like it because nothing makes sense and it's wild. But then Much Ado About Nothing is very witty, and it has a completely different type of humor to it. So even though they're both comedies, it's like two opposite ends of the spectrum. it's more like Monty Python humor, honestly, is exactly what I like in it too. And then Merchant of Venice is technically a comedy. We in modernity call it a tragicomedy because of the forced conversion of Shylock and some different components there with that. But it was written as a comedy, which is why historical context is kind of important there to understand, like, oh, this is obviously not acceptable in today's world, but 400 years ago, like that would have been funny. You know, it's one of those things that like kind of didn't age well, but that's exactly why it's important to still read it and learn it. So we will read those 6 plays. There's 3 in the fall and 3 in the spring. And I'm hoping that it'll be a lot of fun to have some more people join us. And, you know, especially for those adults, whether you're homeschooling or like I just have friends that are like, I want to read the Shakespeares. And this kind of gives me accountability without having to be overly accountable. And to give you kind of that plan and motivation and some extra tidbits to do it along with us.
Well, and those plays that you've chosen are perfect introductions. I mean, those would be, I don't know that I would go with the Romeo and Juliet personally. I'm kind of with your friend who's like, I mean, I know it's ridiculous. I get what you're saying, but I mean, I'm just not my favorite.
Yeah.
That being said, no, all those other ones are just the
Yeah.
perfect introduction to Shakespeare, like the genre of Shakespeare. Those are all also pretty easy to understand. Some of them are a
Yeah.
little bit harder. And so I think
Yeah.
this is such a great opportunity for just have fun, have some fun with Shakespeare this year. And I'll make
Yeah.
sure that that link gets in the show notes too. So if people want to follow along, they can do that with you.
Yeah. And funny enough, Romeo and Juliet is not my most favorite either. I am kind of like on that team with you. Like I can teach it and it's fun to teach it. But one of the reasons I pick it, and it's the first one that we do, is even if you've never read a Shakespeare, everybody has an idea of the story of Romeo and Juliet. Like everybody does. And I'm dating myself here, whether you've seen the Wishbone version or like anything in between, like even freshmen that take that class are like, oh yeah, I know like the plot line of Romeo and Juliet. And so because of that, it's the easiest one to start with because you already are not having to work as hard to understand because you already do, basically. So I just want to say I'm kind of on that team with you. Like I would love to teach Hamlet over like Romeo and Juliet, but
It's a little bit harder to get into.
yeah, and you know, it's Romeo and Juliet. I think every high schooler should end up having to read Romeo and Juliet at some point in time because there are really good like sonnets in Romeo and Juliet. And I think it's a really great example of Shakespeare's wordplay. Um, is it the but soft but light through yonder window breaks? Something in that section there just like is straight up a sonnet. It is a Shakespearean rhyming sonnet in there. And he just has really eloquent literary devices, his metaphors, his similes, his allusions. And so because of that, like I said, it just makes a really good like foundational Shakespeare because it just has a lot of those quintessential components to it, which then makes it easier to pick out when we get into the harder ones like Henry V and Macbeth and even Much Ado. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that makes total sense. And by the way, Wishbone is on YouTube. So I have shown my kids found old Wishbone episodes, which is really fun.
Yes, yes. I mean, if we're really honest, right? If we're really honest, Shakespeare and reading or Wishbone and reading Rainbow are probably why I'm an English teacher. Like, let's call it what it is here. Between reading Rainbow and Wishbone, there I had no chance, you know.
I love it. Anna, I have so enjoyed chatting with you today. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk with me. But before we wrap up, I have to
Yeah,
ask you the questions I'm asking all
yeah.
my guests this season. And the
Yeah.
first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
Everything. I always have like a Kindle book, an audio book, and at least a hard copy book or two going. Um, I'm standing here looking at all of my books, and the one that I'm actually reading is not here right now, which doesn't surprise me, actually. Um, I have been reading, I've been listening to, that's not the right app. Sacred Home, Habits of a Sacred Home. Habits for a Sacred Home by Jennifer Pepito is what I'm listening to right now. I just finished listening to Dan Jones. He has two books, Powers and Thrones and The Plantagenets, that I just listened to. If you are looking for a good narrative style history book that's like engaging and entertaining without feeling like you're reading a history book, I can't recommend his stuff more. He is incredible and he has awesome podcasts too. So Dan Jones is like my favorite, and he's not old, which sounds really funny. He's like 42, but I've been following him for years. So he's like forever 30 in my mind. But I feel like that makes a difference. You know, like he's not like this old, like stodgy professor that you think of. He's like a cool history guy. So yeah, I've been reading him and the Jennifer Pepito book, Sacred Home. And I've been reading The Dudleys, which is about the Dudley family during the Tudor times. Robert Dudley, Gulliford Dudley, who married Jane Grey. Again, I'm getting real deep here. And that is Joanne. Let me find her last name here. I can't find her last name, but I will find it. That's been the hard copy book I've been reading. And then just all of my books for school, all the fun dead people, Chaucer. I reread Beowulf the other day because I'm getting ready to teach that again. So yeah.
You can never have too much Beowulf.
No. And oh gosh, that was one of Tolkien's favorites. And it's really funny. If you read The Hobbit, or even if you've just seen the movies after you've read Beowulf, you're like, oh, that's practically plagiarism. You're like, yeah, he like Loki, the Hobbit is half of the storyline of Beowulf. But Beowulf wasn't found until the 1800s. And so Tolkien, when he was analyzing it and translating it and everything in the early 1900s, he was like one of the first guys. Even though it's the oldest piece of Anglo-Saxon literature we have, it was hidden in a library and it survived like 2 fires, and it was just chilling on some dude's library shelf in England, and they found it and they were like, hey, we think this is important. And that's how we have Beowulf. Like it's old but new, which I think is fun too. So
Oh my goodness. I have so many copies of Beowulf. I have the Tolkien, his sort of
mhm,
personal copy. It wasn't like
mhm.
an official translation he did
Yes,
to print, but
yes,
and then I have like the bilingual Beowulf, so it has the Old
yeah,
English and the
yeah.
modern translation. I have the illustrated Beowulf. I have just the regular Beowulf. I have the children's picture book Beowulf that only uses words that came from Anglo-Saxon, so only words that
Oh my
come from
goodness.
words before 1066, so like before the Norman invasion. So it's a
Mhm.
really cool children's picture book. Yeah, I'm a big Beowulf.
And we do not have we clearly have a thing with like these dead guys, and Beowulf is just like the top of the list there. It's fine. It's
It's
fine.
fine. This is why we get along so well, Anna.
It is. It really is. That and hockey. That and hockey.
Well, I will try. I'm trying. You're convincing me here, little by little. The final question I have for you, Anna, is just what is your best tip for helping with a homeschool day or season that just seems to be going completely off the rails?
Yes. And you and I have been living this, and I'm sure anybody listening has probably followed you and known too. Um, just make it easy on yourself, honestly. We have been using the Good and the Beautiful curriculum for our math and our English, and it is open and go. And I probably would not be surviving homeschooling without it, just because I just have not had like the bandwidth to do any more than that. But I know that like I can minimally be like, okay, we're going to do our English lesson today. We're going to get through a math lesson today. Oh, you really like math today and you'd like to do 2 lessons of it? Great, let's do it, because it takes no prep and I don't have to think about it. And whether it's you or your children, um, again, just having grace with yourself and with your children. And, I have parents that sometimes are like, she just fights me on this. And I'm like, so if she doesn't want to do it that day, like just skip it. Now, you can't do that 5 days a week. You can't do that with every subject or one subject all the time. Like sometimes you just have to suck it up and do it. But try and look at the schedule for yourself and figure out what will work for you. So something that I've noticed with us in our homeschooling the last few years is we are the best homeschoolers between April and like before Thanksgiving. And when the weather is warm, we do school outside all the time. Physically, I don't do very well once the weather turns. I my joints just like fall apart, and I'm not great at staying consistent homeschooling in winter, which is funny. I think most people, they get really cozy and like they feel like it's their best. We are the opposite. We are warm weather people. And so like I sat down and I looked at my calendar, and in the state of Pennsylvania, we have to have 180 days. Um, and we have to like document that attendance. And I figured out that like if I do 4 days a week from April to that November, that we can take December, January, and February off and only need to do like a few days of school in those 3 months. And I'm like, why am I trying to force myself to do school through the winter when 3 years in a row now we fall off the bandwagon, like with the holidays and with my health and everything? And so I just sat down and was like, I'm going to figure out a schedule that works with the natural rhythm of our home. And that may change next year. That may change 5 years from now as my kids can do things more independently. Um, but I would say definitely make it easy on yourself. We all want to have these rich, beautiful homeschool experiences every day, every year for our children and for ourselves too. Like we don't want to look back and say, I didn't give my kids 100%, or we don't want to look back and say, like, I wish I would have done more. And just understanding that more might happen next month or more might happen next year. You were just posting about how Isaac, like, he hasn't been reading a whole lot with his eyeballs. He's getting better at that, but he's been listening to really great stuff. And you know what? That's the season you guys are in. My kids have listened to The Secret Garden, like playing Magnetiles and stuff, I think 4 times over now. Um, that's okay. And I think giving ourselves the grace to be okay with that is the biggest thing. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's at the end of May, and so I started having like issues over the winter, and then I basically did nothing through January and February, and I had all these doctor's appointments, like, because nobody could figure out what was wrong with me, and I have dysautonomia, and I was passing out, and it's all been really fun. And I was like, we're watching National Treasure for History today. Or like we're watching Liberty Kids, also on YouTube, by the way, for our history today. And we're going to listen to books because I actually hate reading out loud, which is a really funny fact about me. I hate reading out loud. So I'm like, we're going to listen to books, and you guys are going to build me like a dinosaur zoo. And that's just what it's going to be. So yeah, have grace for yourself and just be willing to be fluid. And you know what? The easy resources like YouTube and Open Go and Go curriculum are there for a reason. You're not a worse homeschool mom for using any of them. It's why
Yeah.
they're there.
Yeah, I've had seasons. I actually love like a good DIY homeschool plan. And
Yes.
I have seasons where I just go all in on that. And then there are other seasons where you just need to be able to open and read what is on the page and call it good. And they're both
Yes.
okay. It's not one
Yes.
is not like the right or the wrong or the good and the bad choice. It's just the best choice is the one that's going to get done faithfully, joyfully,
Yeah.
mostly joyfully and consistently, right? That's really
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anna, I am so excited that we've been able to chat today, and I can't wait to share this conversation. Can you let people know where they can find you all around the internet?
Yeah, I am. Annie F. Downs always says that I am embarrassingly easy to find. Everything is The Nurtured Bee. So you can follow me on Instagram at The Nurtured Bee. My website is The Nurtured Bee. And then I also started a second Instagram account, Nurtured Bee Reads, because I've been reading a ton, and I read a lot of mostly closed door romance, which is basically like Hallmark movies in a book form, and they're really cheesy. But when you spend a lot of time reading thicker things like Harold Bloom and Shakespeare and Chaucer and Kate Chopin and all of the fun dead people, it's nice to basically have the junk food literature. But it's nice because it's clean and it's feel good and everybody has happy endings. And who's not a sucker for a good romance once in a while? And I don't watch a lot of TV, so books are kind of it. So yes, The Nurtured Bee is my website and my Instagram page then.
And I will have all of those links and the links as well to your courses in the show notes for this episode over at humilityanddoxology.com. Thank you to everyone who is listening or watching. Please take a minute to make sure you are subscribed to the podcast in your app. Leave a rating and review. 5 stars would be great. And if you're watching on YouTube, do make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as well so you don't miss all of the wonderful homeschool conversations coming your way this season. Anna, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a joy.